G'day everybody, how you going today? It is so good to see you. I do hope that you are super well. Today I want to share with you news from Canon regarding the R1. Yes, a development announcement is here. Now, it's pretty short on details, but I do think if we read between the lines, there is some information here that gives us a sense of where the Canon R1 is heading. Now, of course, we've had the Canon R5 since mid-2020, so we are talking a full 4 years since that camera came out. The R3 was out in 2021, along with the A1 and the Z9, sprinkled across that whole year. And that is now 3 years ago. So the R1, it's been a long time coming and expectations are high. What does this development announcement tell us? Well, there's a lot of things it doesn't tell us. Actually, most things it doesn't tell us. And one of the first things that is most exciting about a development announcement is, well, when is the R1 shipping? We still don't know.
What the press release states is that they are aiming for a 2024 release. Aiming, it kind of indicates there is a possibility that they won't make 2024.
And if we look at, for example, what Nikon did with the Z9, it was development announced in roughly the first quarter of 2021, and it arrived in the last quarter of 2021. So something like 6 to 9 months between the development announcement and the launch. So when will we see the R1? Will it be coming at the end of 2024? Well, considering we're now pretty much in the middle of 2024, that is a pretty reasonable bet. And it might even be into 2025 if we're 6 to 9 months away. So what can we learn from this announcement? Well, they're talking a fair bit about sports and journalism and speed and AF speed and AI acquisition of AF. These are characteristics which are most important in sports, wildlife, somewhat journalism, but not so much. And this gives me the sense that this camera, as they don't talk about megapixels at all, they don't talk about 8K at all, they do talk about video, but of course 6K is great in video, 4K is great in video. So the fact that they talk about video doesn't mean it's going to be 8K. So I don't think, based on what we're hearing here, and again, if we think about what Nikon telegraphed with the Z9, they did telegraph 8K really early. I don't think it's going to be 8K. I don't think it's going to be 45 megapixels. I think they're going to leave that to the R5 II, which I think we'll probably see sooner. I think we'll see the R5 II before we see the actual R1 shipping. And thus, what's it going to be? Well, the only rumour that I've seen over the last couple of years is it's going to be a super fast, maybe 30 megapixel camera. And it feels like it might be heading in that sort of direction. Now, it's interesting. If we have a think about what the R3 was, there is some speculation that the R3 was actually the R1, but then the A1 and the Z9 came out and it was like, ooh, we can't call that our flagship. But if you think historically what both Nikon and Canon did with their flagship cameras, they were lower megapixels in the 12, 16, 20-ish sort of megapixel bracket, with the slower, higher megapixel cameras being 40, 45 or 50 megapixels. So the high end, the high speed and the flagship was usually relegated somewhat lower megapixels. And it's possible that Canon was following that theme into their flagship mirrorless. And then as Sony and Nikon changed the game, Canon realized that they couldn't make that camera their R1. So they badged it the R3. The reason I bring that up is because 24 megapixels from the R3 is not a particularly large jump if we go from there to 30 megapixels. For the target audience, of course, 30 megapixels is more than enough. And we know that Canon uses birders. People who want sort of higher resolution and want to be able to crop in, they seem to be satisfied with an R5. And obviously an R5 II will be an improvement on an R5. So it's a fair argument that Canon will say the flagship R1 is absolutely for bleeding edge speed like we've never seen before, and that the R5 II will still be very, very fast as it is today, the R5, but it will have higher megapixels and it won't be as crazy fast. So That kind of makes sense to me. We kind of have, let's say, a 30 megapixel R1 and a 45 or 50 megapixel R5 II. And as I said, in this press release, they're talking about AF. They're not talking any video spec. They're not talking any megapixels. They're talking mostly, if there was one thing that they're leaning on the most in this press release, it's their autofocus system. And Canon is saying it's going to be the best we've ever seen. It's going to be dramatically amazing. They're also talking about a new CMOS sensor. That doesn't really tell us anything because a stacked sensor can be CMOS and a global sensor can be CMOS. So it could be stacked or it could be global. Now, the fact that the A9 III at 24 megapixels is global, could it be another 24 megapixel global sensor? Hard to say, but what I hear around the traps is it's highly unlikely that Canon will go global with the R1. So my best guess is they're going to land with a stacked sensor, which is what the R3 is. They know it, they've had a few years to perfect that sensor, and that's probably what we'll see, but who knows? They might go global. Now, when we talk about stacked, you can just add more and more RAM right next to the photo sites, and you can run these things faster than the current ones are running, Z8 and Z9 being the fastest stack sensors we currently have at 45 megapixels. But they're still not instantaneous. That's what global is. So there could be even faster, potentially faster stacked sensors that come onto the market. Maybe that's where the R1's going to land. It's going to be somewhere in there, I reckon, stacked or global, probably stacked. Crazy fast autofocus, great video spec. So my guess is we're talking high frame rates. Now, they've talked about creating a new processor for running the camera in general.
And in regard to that new processor, I find this paragraph really interesting. The combination of the new image processing system and deep learning technology will help to improve image quality. Canon implements the image noise reduction function, which has been previously developed and improved as part of the software for PCs, as a camera function to further improve image quality and contribute to user creativity. Now, basically what that says to me is we could well have computer-level noise reduction, AI noise reduction, like we find in Photoshop, for example, inside the Canon R1. Now, this is even more interesting when you look at the size of the body. The R1 appears to be very big. What are Canon doing? I think it's really interesting.
But they are saying they're still using the Digic 10 or X processor, which is interesting because that processor's, it's quite old at this point in time. Maybe it's really, really powerful. Maybe they're using 2 or 4. Or maybe, as I've speculated before, it's Digic 10 architecture, but maybe it's got more cores, just like Apple keep adding more cores to their processors to get more and more speed, more and more efficiency, more and more things going on at once. So calling it the X doesn't mean it's going to be the same as other X's. Who knows? But it's not a major generational jump. Maybe the industry sees no point in that, and I certainly see no point in that. When we have a camera like the A9 III running raw 24 megapixels at 120 frames per second, and we have a few other manufacturers giving us 120 frames per second in JPEG and so on, we have to start to ask the question, do we need even more speed? Do we need more than 120 frames per second in RAW? Are they going to give us 240 frames per second in RAW? This, from my perspective, becomes super duper niche, and there are so few people that are actually going to use that and want to pay for getting that. And that is perhaps why the processor is no faster, but what they are giving us is even more sticky autofocus, and that seems to be what's coming out of this. All right, everybody, well, there it is. That is the Canon R1. It's a pretty massive release. I think the camera is designed for environments like this, night shooting at a sports field. That's where I think it's going to land. I think it's going to be super good at it. Sports, like that's where you'll see it, on the sidelines of big games. And the idea is that the autofocus can just stay on whatever player you choose.
And I think this line from the press release is super interesting when it comes to when is the camera coming out and what's it up to at the moment. Canon is working on field tests for this camera and will support capturing definitive and impactful moments at international sporting events to be held in the future. This says to me Olympics, and test units are at the Olympics.
I'd love to hear your thoughts about the Canon R1. When do you think it's going to come? Are you interested in getting one? And well, it's about time. I think we would all agree with that. All right, everybody, it's been so good to see you. And if this is your first time here, I would love to see you again. So please do subscribe, please share, and please like. All right, bye for now.